The silence of the swamplands wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, suffocating, a thick blanket of humidity and unseen life that pressed in on you from all sides. Every rustle of reeds, every distant croak of a bullfrog felt magnified, a prelude to something unknown, something lurking just beyond the veil of dense foliage. Our research team, comprised of 4 souls eager for discovery and perhaps a little too confident, had ventured deep into this forgotten corner of the world. Led by the perpetually optimistic Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose passion for rare flora bordered on obsession, we were here in pursuit of phosphofungus lumina, a bioluminescent organism rumored to thrive only in the most remote, untouched bogs. This elusive fungus, Eris believed, held the key to revolutionary breakthroughs in sustainable energy. What we found instead was something far older, infinitely more malevolent, and terrifyingly real. Our first week was a grueling mixture of relentless fieldwork and cautious optimism. The swamp itself, an endless expanse of gnarled cypress knees, murky, tannin-stained water, and suffocating tangles of Spanish moss, was a formidable adversary. The air was a constant buzz of mosquitoes and horseflies, each bite a tiny, insistent reminder of our vulnerability. "Another mile, team," Eris would shout, slapping a fat mosquito on his neck, his voice echoing unnaturally in the dense, humid air. His enthusiasm, though infectious at first, was beginning to grate. The models predict prime conditions just beyond that ridge. We're practically on top of it. Sarah, our sharp-witted paleontologist, always had a retort ready, a dry wit that was usually a welcome relief. "Or another mile of mud and disappointment, Eris. My feet are starting to look like ancient fossils, perfectly preserved in this delightful bog." She'd grin, a tired, lopsided smile, but the exhaustion was etched deeply on her face, just as it was on Mark's, our quiet botanist. Mark, a gentle giant with an encyclopedic knowledge of plant life, spent most of his time meticulously cataloging samples, murmuring Latin names to himself as he patiently swatted away the relentless insects. And then there was me, Elias, the team's reluctant documentarian, primary source of cynicism, and increasingly its self-appointed worrywart. My expensive camera gear was my constant companion, and my main objective was to keep it and myself from succumbing to the swamp's insidious embrace. The beauty of the place, the way the sunlight dappled through the canopy onto shimmering water, was undeniable, but even then, a faint, unsettling unease had begun to prickle at the edges of my perception. The swamp felt ancient, watchful, as if its very breath held secrets best left undisturbed. The shift began subtly. It wasn't with a sudden roar or a shocking discovery, but with absence. It was the small, accumulating details that started to fray the edges of our scientific composure. On a Tuesday morning, overcast and particularly muggy, Mark's specialized soil sampling kit, a heavy, distinctive piece of equipment crafted from anodized aluminum and carbon fiber designed to withstand the harshest conditions, was gone. He'd left it secured outside his tent, strapped tightly to a tree trunk as per our protocol. "Must have been a rogue gust," Eris declared, his voice a little too quick, a little too loud. The air, I noted, had been perfectly still all night, not a single leaf stirring. "Or," he continued, attempting levity, "a particularly industrious raccoon with an affinity for high-tech sampling tools. A raccoon that can unbuckle military-grade straps?" I muttered, unconvinced, looking at the neatly undone buckles. There were no claw marks, no signs of a struggle, just an absence. Mark, usually so meticulous, simply stared at the empty space, a furrow appearing between his brows. He didn't say anything, but I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes. We spent an hour searching the immediate vicinity, but the kit had simply vanished, swallowed by the indistinguishable green. Then came the smell. It was distinct, sickening, an odor of something dead, but not quite. It wasn't the sweet decay of a deer carcass or the pungent musk of an alligator, smells we had become accustomed to in the swamp. This was earthier, metallic, like rust and wet soil mixed with something profoundly rotten, but with an underlying cloying sweetness, like decaying orchids, that made your throat itch and your stomach clench. It hung heavy in the humid air, thick and nauseating. "What in blazes is that?" Sarah exclaimed, wrinkling her nose and swatting at the air as if she could brush away the invisible miasma. Her face was green. "It's like dying meat and something chemical. Like an old battlefield." Eris, ever the pragmatist, offered, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Probably a large predator. A bear perhaps, or a very big boar. Got a kill nearby. The humidity holds the scent." We'll set up a perimeter alarm tonight, motion activated. Everyone, double check your tent zippers. Make sure all food is secured in the bear-proof canisters. He tried to project calm, to instill a sense of control, but I saw the subtle tightening around his eyes, the way his jaw muscles flexed. He was trying to convince himself as much as us. The swamp, which had initially felt wild and untamed, now began to feel less like a place of scientific discovery and more like an entity, watchful and malevolent. The beauty we had admired slowly began to twist into something sinister, the shadows under the cypress trees deepening into hungry abysses. Eris's attempts at rationalization evaporated with the next discovery. Bears, no matter how large or industrious, don't leave tracks like these. It was Sarah who found the first one late that afternoon while Mark was attempting to filter water from a stagnant, tannin-stained pool near the edge of a particularly dense cluster of cypress trees. Eris, Elias, Mark, get over here. Her voice was strained, not just from physical exertion, but edged with a brittle note of fear. We hurried over, Mark dropping his filter pump with a splash. There, pressed deep into the boggy earth, was a print the size of a dinner plate. It wasn't round like a bear's paw, nor elongated like an alligator's foot. It was composed of 3 elongated, clawed toes, each ending in a point that suggested immense pressure, as if it could puncture concrete. The sheer depth of the impression spoke of unimaginable weight. "No known terrestrial animal makes this," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, tracing the outline with a gloved finger. Her face, usually tanned from fieldwork, was pale beneath her mosquito net, her usual academic enthusiasm replaced by a dawning, stark terror. Too heavy, too alien. And look! She pointed to shallower indentations beside it, leading away from the deeper print. There's a drag mark, like something with a really heavy tail or a third limb dragging on the ground. It wasn't a neat, purposeful trail, but a ragged gouge, as if whatever made it was struggling with its own immense bulk. Eris knelt, studying the print, his hand hovering inches above the disturbed earth. Even he was silent for a long, agonizing moment, his scientific mind grappling with the impossible. "We're in a highly isolated ecosystem," he finally said, his voice flat, attempting to sound authoritative, though it was clear he was speaking more to himself. "Perhaps an undiscovered species of large reptile. A new apex predator. We just need to be more vigilant. We'll report this, of course, but for now, caution. Extreme caution." But his words lacked conviction. They were hollow echoes of a confidence he no longer possessed. We stood there, unified by a growing, unspoken dread, the swamp's eerie sounds suddenly amplifying around us, no longer natural, but watchful. That night, the sounds began in earnest. Not the usual nocturnal swamp chorus of chirping frogs, buzzing crickets, and distant bird calls, but something deeper, more resonant, something fundamentally wrong. A guttural rasp like stone grinding on stone that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath our sleeping mats. It sounded like something enormous dragging itself through the undergrowth, punctuated by sharp, wet snaps, the breaking of thick branches, the tearing of something fibrous, fleshy. "What is that?" Mark whispered from his tent, his voice tight with fear, thin and reedy in the overwhelming darkness. We huddled in our tents, flashlights clutched uselessly, their beams painting circles on the canvas as we listened to the unseen horror moving outside our flimsy shelters. I could hear Eris fumbling for his satellite phone again, cursing softly when he found the signal still too weak, the swamp's electromagnetic interference a cruel joke. Sarah was silently sobbing, stifled by her sleeping bag, her muffled cries a stark counterpoint to the monstrous sounds outside. Every rustle outside sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins, a desperate premonition of what was to come. The creature would stop, its silence more terrifying than its movement, then start again, its progress slow but undeniably deliberate, methodically circling our camp, testing our boundaries, like a hunter sizing up its prey. "It sounds like it's sniffing us out," I murmured, my voice barely audible above the rising symphony of horror, a thought I immediately regretted voicing. "Don't say that, Elias." Eris snapped, his scientific detachment completely gone, replaced by raw, human terror. The worst part was the rhythm. A heavy thump, a dragging sky then a wet, squelching plop as it pulled its immense bulk free from the mire, each step closer, each sound more distinct. It went on for what felt like hours, an eternity in the claustrophobic darkness, until the first, faint hint of dawn began to paint the sky, promising neither warmth nor safety. The next morning, the horror became sickeningly tangible, undeniable, stripped of all ambiguity. We emerged from our tents, stiff with sleeplessness and dread, into a camp that felt fundamentally violated, twisted into a scene of utter devastation. Our lone supply helicopter, usually tethered securely to reinforced stakes hammered deep into the ground, lay twisted and crumpled 20 feet from its landing pad. Its metal skin was ripped open like a tin can, jagged edges gleaming like monstrous teeth, as if by giant, careless hands. The pilot's seat was empty, the cabin a mangled mess of wires, crushed instruments, and splintered glass. The pilot, a gruff but dependable man named Ray, was nowhere to be seen. No, this isn't possible, Eris breathed, his face drained of all color, his perpetually optimistic demeanor shattered into 1,000 pieces. He looked like a child whose most cherished toy had been brutally, senselessly destroyed. His scientific rigor, his cautious pragmatism, dissolved into naked disbelief. "Ray? Where's Ray?" he mumbled, staring at the empty, mangled cockpit. And amidst the wreckage, a smear. A thick, viscous trail, glistening black in the nascent morning light, snaked away from the helicopter and deeper into the swamp. It wasn't mud. It was something organic, something alive. It pulsed faintly, a sickly green luminescence shimmering within its depths, like a faint, internal light. As Mark cautiously approached it, his face pale with revulsion, a wave of that cloying, metallic stench washed over us, stronger, more oppressive than ever. It was the smell of decomposition, yes, but mixed with something else, something acrid, almost electric. The fungus, Mark whispered, his eyes wide with dawning dread, his voice barely audible. The phosphofungus lumina. It's part of it. He pointed to the faint green glow within the black goo. It's not just growing here, Eris. It's feeding this thing. Or it is this thing. The glowing ooze wasn't merely a scientific discovery, it was an emanation, a terrifying secretion from whatever had destroyed our only way out. The creature wasn't just living in the swamp, it was intertwined with its very biology, a monstrous symbiosis that defied all known natural laws. The realization struck us with a force more potent than any physical blow. This thing was not merely a large animal, it was something profoundly alien, something born of the swamp itself, fueled by the very bioluminescence we had sought. Fear, raw and primal, settled over us, heavier than the swamp air, colder than any deep water current. Our scientific curiosity, our hunger for discovery withered away, replaced by a singular, overwhelming instinct, survival. Eris, rallying what little composure he had left, finally gave the order, his voice ragged, almost a croak. "Forget the fungus. Forget the research. We evacuate. On foot. Now. Southeast. That's the quickest route to higher ground, towards the old logging road." His eyes darted nervously around the dense perimeter of the swamp as if expecting the ground itself to swallow us whole. We packed frantically, clumsy with terror, our movements jerky and uncoordinated. Every snapping twig, every distant bird call made us jump, our nerves frayed to breaking point. The air grew colder, the stench overpowering, seeming to come from all directions at once, a vile miasma that filled our lungs and burned our nostrils. I was zipping up my pack, my hands trembling so violently I could barely fasten the buckles when a shadow, not of trees or clouds, fell over our camp. The sunlight, already struggling to penetrate the dense canopy, seemed to vanish entirely, plunging us into a premature, unnatural twilight. The swamp had stopped breathing. The frogs were silent. The birds had flown. We looked up. It rose from the mire, slow and deliberate, a towering silhouette against the bruised, sickly sky, the very air vibrating with its ascent. It was immense, easily 20 feet tall, a living nightmare that defied all biological classification. It was a monstrous amalgamation of chitinous plates, glistening, fleshy tendrils, and something that resembled ancient, moss-covered stone. Its skin, where visible between the armored segments, was a mottled gray-green, slick with swamp water and that same sickening bioluminescent ooze that pulsed with faint, eerie green light. Two enormous, unblinking eyes, glowing a malevolent amber, fixed on us with an ancient, predatory intelligence that spoke of eons of survival. Its head was a nightmarish fusion of reptilian and insectoid features, dominated by a gaping maw lined with rows upon rows of needle-sharp teeth that glinted wetly in the dim light. From inside its throat, I could see flickers of that green luminescence, like a hellish internal furnace. It was the source of the terrible smell, the unearthly sounds, the stolen equipment. It was the swamp's true, terrifying apex. A low, rattling hiss escaped its throat, a sound that promised absolute annihilation, a sound that burrowed deep into your bones and turned your blood to ice. It raised one massive, clawed limb, thicker than a tree trunk, from the muck, dripping the viscous black goo. The limb was segmented, ending in 3 razor-sharp talons, each as long as my forearm. It brought it down with terrifying speed, a blurred motion of immense power, crushing our largest tent and scattering its contents like dust. The ground trembled violently, sending shockwaves through our feet. The air tasted of ozone and death. "Run! For God's sake, run!" Eris screamed, his voice ripped from his throat, finally snapping us out of our frozen terror. He grabbed Sarah's arm, his grip desperate, and pulled her towards the tree line, his eyes wide with a desperate, new kind of courage born of pure survival instinct. "Move! Move! Don't look back!" We scrambled, half blinded by panic, our movements clumsy and desperate. We dove into the thickets, thorns tearing at our clothes, branches whipping at our faces. The creature, surprisingly agile for its immense size, lumbered after us, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground, each step a sickening squelch as it pulled its colossal weight free from the mud. The swamp, our supposed refuge, became a treacherous maze of clinging roots and deceptive, bottomless pools. I heard the crash of cypress trees being pushed aside, their ancient wood splintering like matchsticks, the terrible tearing sounds as it tore through the dense undergrowth, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. Every beat of my heart was a desperate plea, every breath a gasp for a life I feared was already forfeit. I was behind Eris and Sarah, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my ribs, each beat a frantic drum against the backdrop of the monster's relentless pursuit. Mark, a few paces behind me, was panting heavily, his face a mask of utter despair. "Keep moving. Don't look back," Eris yelled, his voice strained, desperate, echoing through the claustrophobic confines of the swamp. He was still dragging Sarah, who seemed to be faltering, her movements stiff. Then Sarah stumbled. Her foot caught on a thick, gnarled root, and she went down with a sharp, piercing cry. Before Eris could even turn to help her, before he could utter a single word, the creature was upon them. It moved with an unnatural speed, a blur of gray-green scales and glistening black ooze. I saw its massive claw descend. I heard her scream, a sharp, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated terror abruptly cut short. It was followed by a sickening wet tearing, like fabric ripping, but far, far worse, a sound that would forever be seared into my memory. A sound that belonged to a predator dismembering its prey. Eris, frozen for a split second, let out a choked gasp, a sound of utter despair, of a soul breaking, before he too was engulfed by the monstrosity, his body disappearing behind its immense, thrashing form. I didn't dare look back. My legs, fueled by a surge of pure adrenaline, pumped relentlessly, carrying me deeper into the oppressive, shadowed swamp. Ahead, I saw Mark, our quiet botanist, trip over a cypress knee, stumbling face first into the murky water. He scrambled, desperately trying to get back to his feet, his hands flailing in the muck. He looked back at me, his eyes wide and pleading, filled with a silent, desperate plea for help. In that horrifying moment, I knew I couldn't save him. The creature's shadow fell over him, immense and suffocating, swallowing him whole. Then came a sickening crunch, a sound of bones splintering, echoing through the swamp, a sound that would forever haunt my nightmares, replaying in an endless loop behind my eyelids. I ran until my lungs burned, until the acidic stench of the creature was all I could smell, until the terrifying rasps and squelches of its movement faded into the background, replaced only by the ragged, desperate gasps of my own breathing. I pushed through dense thickets, thorns tearing at my clothes and scoring deep, burning lines on my skin. I splashed through murky, knee-deep water, losing my footing countless times, my expensive camera bag bouncing uselessly against my hip, its lens cap long lost. Each step was an act of raw, unthinking will, propelled by a singular, desperate need to survive, to escape this living nightmare. The faces of Eris, Sarah, and Mark flashed before my eyes, their final moments forever etched into my mind. I was the last one. I had to keep going. Finally, hours later, or perhaps just minutes, time had lost all meaning in my flight. I collapsed on firmer ground. It was an island of slightly higher elevation, a small patch of pine trees amidst the pervasive swamp, their scent a faint, forgotten comfort. My body shook uncontrollably, a violent tremor that started deep in my core and rattled every bone. My muscles screamed in protest, aching from the relentless run, but the pain was a dull background hum compared to the searing terror that still gripped my mind. I lay there, gasping, staring up at the canopy where the first stars were beginning to pierce the twilight, cold and indifferent. I didn't know if I had truly escaped. The silence here was different from the swamps. It was a vast, empty silence, punctuated only by the frantic beat of my own heart and the buzzing of insects, now sounding like a choir of mocking whispers. Every rustle in the leaves, every distant croak of a bullfrog sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me, making me flinch, making me scan the deepening shadows for any sign of movement. My eyes burned, my throat was raw, and a profound, chilling loneliness settled over me. I didn't know if anyone else had survived. The terrible truth, cold and unyielding, was that I was likely the only one. Eris, Sarah, Mark, gone. Devoured by something that shouldn't exist, something the world wasn't ready for. I spent the night huddled beneath a thick pine, my mind a chaotic storm of fear and grief. Sleep was an impossible luxury. Every time my eyes closed, I saw it, the glistening black goo, the malevolent amber eyes, the gaping maw filled with needle-sharp teeth. I heard the sickening tearing sounds, the final screams, the bone-splintering crunch. The stench, that cloying, metallic sweetness, seemed to cling to my clothes, my skin, a phantom odor that I knew would never truly leave me. The next morning, driven by a desperate, gnawing need to put as much distance as possible between myself and the mire, I forced my battered body to move. I walked for days, following the sun, relying on my basic survival training, drinking filtered swamp water, and forcing down energy bars that tasted like ash. My camera, miraculously, was still mostly functional, its memory card filled with images of a journey that had started with hope and ended in unimaginable horror. These photos, I knew, would be my burden, my proof, and perhaps my undoing. I eventually stumbled onto a rural highway miles from anything, looking like a ghost. A passing logging truck, its driver initially horrified by my appearance, eventually understood enough of my frantic, broken words to take me to the nearest town. I told my story to disbelieving authorities, to skeptical doctors, to worried psychologists. They attributed my wild tales to trauma, to hallucinations induced by shock and dehydration. They saw a man broken by the wilderness, not by a monster. I am a survivor, yes, but I am also a haunted man, forever marked by the alien horror that lurks in the mire. The swamplands hold secrets, ancient and terrible, and some, like that monstrous entity, are best left undisturbed. I carry the weight of what I saw, what I heard, what I lost. And sometimes, when the light hits just right, when the shadows stretch long and dark, I swear I can still see the faint, sickly green glow reflected in the depths of my own panicked eyes, a permanent stain from the thing in the mire. It's still there, waiting, breathing deep within the forgotten heart of the swamp. And I know with chilling certainty that it remembers me too. The jarring transition from the primordial terror of the swamp to the sterile indifference of civilization was almost as disorienting as the escape itself. The logging truck, driven by a burly, taciturn man named Jebediah, eventually dropped me off at a gas station convenience store that smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. The fluorescent lights hummed with an unnatural brightness, assaulting eyes accustomed to the dim, filtered light of the swamp. I was a spectacle, a gaunt, mud-caked figure, clothes shredded, skin scratched and inflamed from insect bites and thorn bushes. My face was skeletal, my eyes wide and bloodshot, reflecting a terror that seemed to bypass comprehension in the faces of the few patrons. Jebediah, bless his weary soul, had given me a bottle of lukewarm water and a candy bar, but his eyes, though sympathetic, held a flicker of deep skepticism when I tried to explain, my voice raw and hoarse, about the helicopter. About Eris and Sarah and Mark, about the thing. He just nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the wilderness behind us, a knowing sadness in his expression that suggested he'd seen enough broken people come out of those woods. "You get yourself some help, son," was all he said before rumbling off, leaving me utterly alone. The local sheriff, a stoic man named Deputy Miller, arrived 20 minutes later. He was polite but firm, his questions probing without being accusatory, yet I could sense the underlying current of disbelief. He kept glancing at my tattered appearance, at the wildness in my eyes. "You say a monster? 20 feet tall? Tore up a helicopter." His pen hovered over his notepad, his expression carefully neutral. I showed him the camera still clutched in my hand, my sole piece of tangible evidence. "I have pictures. The tracks, the helicopter, the goo. I took pictures." His eyebrows barely twitched. "We'll need to impound that as evidence, son. Standard procedure for a missing persons case." His tone was gentle but authoritative. I clutched the camera tighter for a moment, an irrational fear that once it was out of my hands, my story would truly vanish. But my exhaustion was too profound, my will too broken. I handed it over, a silent prayer that the images within its memory card would speak the truth I couldn't articulate. I was taken to a small, rural hospital. The nurses were kind, their faces a mixture of pity and concern. They cleaned my wounds, administered 4 fluids, and offered bland, comforting words. A doctor, Dr. Henderson, with kind, tired eyes, spoke to me softly, asking about my physical condition, about my memories. It sounds like a profound traumatic experience, Elias, he said, his voice laced with professional compassion. The mind can do strange things under extreme duress. Hallucinations, distortions of reality. It's a coping mechanism. He prescribed sedatives, and for the first time in days, the terrifying visions receded, replaced by a merciful, dreamless void. But the brief reprieve only lasted until I woke. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, and the phantom stench of decay still clung to my nostrils. The real horror, I realized, wasn't just in the swamp, it was in the world's refusal to believe. Days bled into weeks, each one a relentless battle against an insidious enemy, disbelief. I was discharged from the hospital, physically recovering but mentally shattered. My story, once dismissed as a traumatic delusion, now became a public curiosity. Local news outlets picked up on the swamp survivor, painting me as either a hero who escaped an unknown wilderness danger or, more commonly, as a tragic figure whose mind had snapped under pressure. The scientific community, especially the university that funded Eris's expedition, offered condolences and launched an official investigation, but it focused on unexplained disappearance and probable wildlife attack, not on a monstrous entity. Deputy Miller returned my camera after a week, its memory card extracted and secured. "We've reviewed the footage, Elias," he said, his voice softer this time, almost apologetic. "The helicopter is wrecked, consistent with a very large animal attack. And those tracks are certainly unusual. But there's no visual evidence of a giant creature. No clear photos of it." My heart sank. The conditions were poor, I pleaded, the light was failing, it was fast. He just nodded, a weary resignation in his eyes. "We understand. We're sending a search and rescue team and some wildlife experts to the coordinates you provided. But we can't send them after a 20-foot monster, son. We need concrete evidence." The burden of proof, I realized, lay solely on me, and I had nothing but my shattered memory. The images on the card, when I finally saw them on a borrowed laptop, were blurry, indistinct. The helicopter wreckage was clear, yes, but the smear was just a dark patch, the track print recognizable but lacking the visceral terror of its real-world counterpart. The photos I'd taken of the creature, in the chaotic moments of its ascent, were nothing but dark blurs against the setting sun, indistinguishable from a tree line or a trick of the light. My hands had been shaking too violently, my focus too broken by terror. The truth was there, but the lens hadn't captured it. I became obsessed. I spent hours poring over maps, cross-referencing Eris's journals, which, thankfully, had been retrieved from a secure, waterproof case in the recovered camp supplies, searching for any obscure reference. Any forgotten legend that might corroborate my impossible tale. I visited dusty libraries, poring over regional folklore archives, looking for tales of malevolent swamp spirits, forgotten beasts. Most were quaint, harmless superstitions. But then, in a brittle, leather-bound volume detailing local indigenous legends, I found a passage that sent a chill down my spine. It spoke of the mire walker, a creature of the deep bog, born of the earth's ancient humors, and the strange, glowing mosses that pulsed with an unholy light. It consumed everything, leaving only a shimmering, black residue. The description was vague, symbolic, but the core elements were disturbingly similar. It was enough. A flicker of hope in the suffocating darkness of disbelief. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe others had seen it before, perhaps centuries ago, and their accounts had simply been relegated to myth. But if it was real, if it was indeed the mire walker of legend, then the swamp was not just a place of scientific interest, it was a hungry, living tomb. And I had to go back. Not to fight it, but to understand. To gather undeniable proof. To prevent anyone else from becoming just another footnote in the swamp's long, bloody history. The compulsion grew, a cold, insistent voice in my mind, telling me that the swamp wasn't finished with me yet. The rediscovery of the mire walker legend became my anchor in a sea of skepticism. It was a flimsy thread, a whisper from antiquity, but it was enough to gnaw at the edges of my rational mind, slowly unraveling the neat medical diagnoses of trauma and delusion. The specific mention of glowing mosses and shimmering black residue in the old folklore text echoed Mark's frantic discovery of the phosphofungus lumina and the creature's viscous secretion. The coincidences, to me, were too profound to be mere happenstance. This wasn't just a beast, it was something intrinsically linked to the swamp's darkest, most ancient ecosystem. My relentless research led me down increasingly obscure paths. I found old newspaper clippings from the late 1800s detailing inexplicable disappearances of trappers and loggers in areas adjacent to the very swamplands we had explored. The reports were short, quickly dismissed, often attributed to alligator attacks or getting lost, but recurring phrases like strange stench, unnatural quiet, and ground trembled leaped out at me. There was even one brief, almost poetic account from a local newspaper about a hunter who claimed to have seen a moving hill of mud and living shadow, only to be institutionalized shortly thereafter. The parallels were chilling. I also stumbled upon fringe scientific papers, mostly self-published or from obscure ecological journals, discussing the potential for undiscovered, colossal organisms in remote, biodiverse regions. One particularly fascinating and terrifying hypothesis centered on geobiossymbiosis, organisms that draw their energy not from the sun or consuming other life, but from geothermal activity or unique geological compounds, perhaps even incorporating them into their very biology. The phosphofungus lumina, which Mark had theorized was feeding the creature, now seemed less like a simple food source and more like an integral part of its monstrous physiology, perhaps even its very energy source. It wasn't just living in the swamp, it was the swamp or a manifestation of its deepest, most ancient processes. The sheriff's department, having sent their search and rescue teams, found nothing more than the initial wreckage and the vague trails. They declared Eris, Sarah, Mark, and Ray officially missing, presumed deceased due to a catastrophic environmental incident combined with extreme wildlife activity. My photographs were categorized as inconclusive. My story was deemed the ramblings of a man deeply traumatized. My family, though supportive, urged me to seek more psychiatric help, to move on. But how could I move on when the truth pulsed within me? A terrifying, living thing that refused to be silenced. The more they doubted, the more convinced I became. Their disbelief was a wall, and I was armed only with the fragile, shimmering truth. The logical next step, the only step, was to return. Not as a researcher, not as a documentarian, but as a witness. I needed undeniable, unequivocal proof. I needed to warn the world. More than that, I needed to face it. The swamp had taken everything from me. My friends, my profession, my sanity. I owed it to them, and to myself, to shine a light into its darkest corners. The compulsion was no longer a cold whisper. It was a roaring fire, consuming me, driving me back to the place of my deepest fears. The decision to return to the swamplands wasn't made lightly. It was born of a crucible of grief, obsession, and a chilling sense of responsibility. Every rational fiber of my being screamed against it. Doctors had warned me against re-traumatization. My family had pleaded, "You almost died, Elias. What's left for you there?" But their words, though heartfelt, felt hollow against the insistent drumming in my mind. Proof, warning, truth. The monster was still there, consuming, expanding, and no one believed me. I was its only witness. I spent months planning. I didn't announce my intentions, knowing I would be stopped. I liquidated what few assets I had, invested in better, lighter, more specialized equipment. My previous camera was gone, but I acquired a new one, a top-of-the-line model with infrared capabilities and a powerful telephoto lens. This time, I wouldn't leave anything to chance. I studied topographical maps, identified potential escape routes, noted areas of denser tree growth that might offer cover. I learned advanced survival techniques, how to purify water, how to build a makeshift shelter from local materials. I packed only the bare essentials, high-energy rations, first aid, navigation tools, and enough spare batteries to power a small village. And the camera. Always the camera. My re-entry point was miles from our original camp, a section of the swamp I'd noted on Eris's maps as unexplored, potentially hazardous. My logic was grim. If the creature was expanding, its influence might be spreading. If it was truly linked to the phosphofungus, perhaps I could find areas where the fungus was unusually prevalent, hinting at the monster's current activity or future growth. I approached the swamp with a reverence born of terror, no longer seeing it as a pristine ecosystem, but as a living, breathing predator. Its watery surface a deceptive calm over unspeakable horrors. The air, as I stepped back under the oppressive canopy, was exactly as I remembered. Thick, humid, and heavy with the scent of decomposition. But now it was subtly different. That cloying, metallic sweetness, the creature's signature odor, was more widespread, less concentrated in one area, as if the swamp itself was exhaling its vile breath. The silence was deeper, more profound than before. Fewer birdsong, less insect chatter. It was the silence of a place where a larger presence had asserted its dominance. A silence that meant everything else had fled or been consumed. Every shadow seemed to shift, every rustle of reeds amplified into a monstrous whisper. My nerves, already frayed, stretched to breaking point. I moved slowly, cautiously, my senses heightened to an unbearable degree, my finger hovering over the shutter button of my camera. I was no longer just Elias, the documentarian. I was a ghost, walking back into my own nightmare, searching for a phantom. But this phantom was real, and it was hungry, and I knew with a terrifying certainty that it was waiting. My return to the heart of the swamplands was a pilgrimage into purgatory. Each step deeper into the oppressive canopy felt like a descent, the dense foliage closing in around me like the maw of some ancient beast. The air grew heavier with that cloying, metallic sweetness, the creature's unmistakable signature, now pervasive like a blanket smothering every natural scent of the swamp. The silence was absolute, a chilling absence of life, save for the frantic pounding of my own heart and the buzzing of the occasional, oblivious mosquito. This wasn't merely a quiet wilderness, it was a vacuum, emptied by a dominant, malevolent presence. My new camera, cold and solid in my trembling hands, felt like both a lifeline and a curse. It was my only weapon, my sole hope of exposing the truth, but it also anchored me to the horrifying reality of what I was facing. I moved with agonizing slowness, my eyes constantly scanning the shadows, my ears straining for any sound beyond my own ragged breathing. I focused on the ground, searching for the telltale three-toed tracks, the viscous black smears, any sign that the mire walker was actively feeding or moving through this new territory. After several hours of agonizing progress, the landscape began to change subtly. The water, already murky, took on a deeper, almost opaque blackness. The cypress trees, once vibrant with moss and epiphytes, appeared sickly, their leaves drooping, their bark streaked with faint, iridescent green slime. It was the phosphofungus lumina, thriving here in an abundance I had never witnessed, its ghostly glow now visible even in the dim daylight, clinging to roots, coating the underside of fallen logs, shimmering on the surface of stagnant pools like a cancerous bloom. It pulsed with an unsettling, internal light, a living beacon drawing me deeper into the heart of its host. I found the first undeniable sign near a cluster of particularly old, gnarled cypress trees. Not a footprint this time, but a deep furrow easily 5 feet wide, plowed through the undergrowth leading straight into a particularly dark and overgrown section of the swamp. It wasn't merely a drag mark, it was as if something enormous had intentionally carved a path, pushing aside trees as if they were reeds. And clinging to the shredded bark of a broken cypress was a thick, glistening glob of the black, bioluminescent ooze, still pulsing with that sickly green light. It was fresh. The stench here was overwhelming, thick enough to taste on my tongue, metallic and putrid. My stomach revolted, but I fought back the nausea, forcing myself to raise the camera. I took dozens of shots, close-ups of the ooze, wide shots of the furrow, details of the damaged vegetation. This was it. Undeniable proof. But the terror was suffocating. I could feel its presence, a primal awareness that stretched beyond sight and sound. It was close. Too close. The silence around me tightened, becoming a solid wall of dread. My skin crawled. I felt watched. Then, from the impenetrable depths ahead, I heard it. A low, resonant thrum, like a colossal drum beating deep within the earth, followed by a wet, sucking sound. It was the mire walker. It was here, and it knew I was back. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee, to abandon my quest for proof and simply survive. But a strange, defiant resolve flickered within me. I had come back for this. To truly face it. To understand. To live or to die with the knowledge that I had fought for the truth. Part 13, the predatory stalk. The resonant thrumming in the mire escalated from a deep vibration to a palpable tremor in the ground beneath my feet. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical pressure, a warning. The wet, sucking noises that accompanied it grew louder, closer, each sky-is plop of colossal weight being pulled from the mud, a hammer blow against my frayed nerves. I was no longer merely sensing its presence, I was witnessing its relentless approach. The silence, once an indicator of its dominance, now felt like a predatory crouch before a final pounce. I retreated, not in a full panic, but with a deliberate, agonizing caution, my mind racing through the escape routes I had meticulously studied. My new camera, clutched tight, felt heavy and cold, a small shield against an impossible terror. My objective had shifted from merely documenting its existence to capturing a truly undeniable image, a clear shot that would silence all doubt. But the thought was a distant, academic one, overshadowed by the visceral need to survive the next few seconds. The phosphofungus lumina coating everything in this part of the swamp seemed to intensify its glow, a sickly green light pulsating in time with the creature's hidden movements. It felt like the swamp itself was breathing, its cancerous heart beating stronger with every step the monster took. The smell, already overwhelming, became unbearable, a suffocating mixture of decay, metal, and something else, something uniquely organic and vile, like exposed viscera. Suddenly, a colossal cypress tree, ancient and unyielding, erupted from the dense foliage to my left. It didn't fall, it was violently shoved aside, its massive trunk cracking with a sound like thunder, sending a cascade of Spanish moss and splintered wood showering down. And then it was there. Not fully revealed, but a glimpse. A mottled gray-green limb, segmented and glistening, at least 10 feet long, ending in those 3 razor-sharp talons, swiped through the space where the tree had been. It was moving fast, faster than anything that size had a right to. It was hunting. It was me it was hunting. I dove behind the thick trunk of another cypress, pressing myself flat against its rough bark, my heart hammering against my ribs, threatening to burst. The creature paused. The thrumming stopped. The wet squelching ceased. The silence that followed was terrifying, an absolute void of sound that spoke of intense focus. It knew exactly where I was. It was playing with me, perhaps, or simply calculating its next move. My breath hitched in my throat. I could feel its immense presence just beyond the tree, the ground faintly vibrating from its sheer mass. The air around me grew colder, a chilling sensation that had nothing to do with the swamp's humidity. It was the cold of a deep, alien abyss. I risked a glance, peeking around the edge of my meager cover. All I saw was a wall of mottled gray-green, the plates of its skin slick with ooze, and a hint of that sickly green luminescence pulsing from within. It was breathing, a faint, raspy sound like sandpaper on concrete, audible even over the drumming in my ears. I was trapped, and the mire walker was enjoying the hunt. The silence stretched, agonizing and heavy, punctuated only by my own ragged breathing and the distant, mocking buzz of insects. I was trapped between the towering cypress and the unimaginable mass of the creature, its silent presence a suffocating shroud. My eyes darted frantically, searching for an escape, a weakness, anything. But there was nothing. Just the impenetrable green of the swamp behind me and the unyielding horror before me. Then, slowly, deliberately, the creature began to move. Not a sudden charge, but a terrifying, measured shift. Its immense head, a nightmarish fusion of reptilian and insectoid features, began to emerge from behind the broken cypress it had displaced. Those 2 enormous, unblinking amber eyes, glowing with malevolent intelligence, slowly came into view, fixing on me with an ancient, predatory gaze that felt like a physical weight pressing down on my soul. There was no rage in them, no animalistic hunger, only a cold, calculating curiosity, a predator assessing its prey. Its gaping maw, lined with rows of needle-sharp teeth, was slightly ajar, revealing the faint, internal green luminescence pulsing from deep within its throat. A low, rattling hiss like countless dry leaves skittering across rock escaped its maw, not a warning, but a sound of anticipation. It was savoring the moment. I could feel the cold radiating from its proximity, a supernatural chill that pierced through my clothes and settled deep in my bones. The cloying, sweet stench of its bioluminescent ooze was now so potent it filled my mouth, coating my tongue with a bitter, metallic taste. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of my impending doom. Every fiber of my being screamed in primal terror, demanding that I close my eyes, that I give in to the overwhelming dread. But something else, a desperate, stubborn defiance, surged through me. I had come back for proof. I had come back for them. With a trembling hand, I slowly, painstakingly raised the camera. The creature didn't react, its amber eyes still fixed on me, almost seeming to observe my futile gesture. My fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled for the focus ring, the lens aiming squarely at that monstrous, alien head. The viewfinder filled with the horror. The chitinous plates, the wet gleam of its teeth, the chilling intelligence in those glowing eyes. I inhaled sharply, trying to steady my shaking hands, and pressed the shutter button. A blinding flash erupted from the camera's powerful flash unit, momentarily turning the swamp into an overexposed, ghostly white. The sudden burst of artificial light, alien to the deep shadows of the mire, seemed to momentarily startle the creature. It recoiled slightly, a massive, jerky movement, and I heard a low, surprised rumble from deep within its chest. It wasn't pain, but perhaps annoyance or an unexpected sensory assault. In that brief window, I squeezed the shutter button repeatedly, the camera whirring and clicking, capturing a rapid-fire sequence of high-resolution images. This was it, the proof. But the moment of advantage was fleeting. The creature quickly recovered, its amber eyes narrowing, no longer just curious, but imbued with a sudden, terrible fury. It had been startled, perhaps even offended. And now it was angry. Its head lowered, its massive body tensing, preparing to strike. The ground vibrated with a renewed intensity. There was no more time for pictures, only for flight. The creature's anger manifested not in a roar, but in an abrupt, terrifying lunge. The ground beneath me heaved as its colossal mass propelled itself forward, shattering the remaining cypress branches that had offered me meager concealment. Its massive, clawed limb, the one that had crushed our tent, swept through the air where I had just been, missing me by mere inches, the wind from its passage chilling my skin. I heard the sickening thwack as it slammed into the cypress trunk behind me, tearing a huge gouge in the ancient wood. My body reacted on pure instinct, a surge of adrenaline bypassing conscious thought. I scrambled, turning and scrambling deeper into the swamp, no longer aiming for any pre-planned escape route, but simply for distance. The swamp, once my carefully mapped terrain, was now a blur of green and brown, a chaotic obstacle course designed to impede. Roots snaked underfoot, water channels became treacherous traps, and the dense foliage whipped at my face, stinging my eyes. The creature was close. Too close. I could hear its heavy squelching footsteps right behind me, feel the ground tremble with each immense impact. Its ragged, raspy breathing, like tearing concrete, was a constant, terrifying companion. I could almost taste the putrid, metallic sweetness of its breath on my neck. It was moving faster than ever, its previous deliberate pace replaced by a relentless, focused pursuit fueled by its newfound rage. It was no longer playing, it was hunting to kill. I splashed through a particularly deep channel, the cold, murky water soaking my clothes and dragging me down. My legs screamed, burning with lactic acid, but I pushed harder, desperately. My vision blurred, sweat and swamp water stinging my eyes. I didn't know how much longer I could keep running. This was it. This was where it ended. Ahead, through a narrow gap in the cypress trees, I saw a faint glimmer of light that wasn't the sickly green of the phosphofungus. It was the muted, gray light of the approaching dawn, hinting at the true edge of the swamplands, the distant logging road. A final, desperate surge of hope, fragile as gossamer, ignited within me. One last sprint. I pushed my body beyond its limits, ignoring the burning in my lungs, the protesting of my muscles. I crashed through a final wall of thorny vines, my skin tearing, and burst out into a slightly clearer area, the ground a little firmer, the trees less dense. The faint outline of the logging road was visible now, a rough, gravel track cutting through the pines. Freedom. But as I stumbled forward, I heard a final, earth-shattering bellow behind me. A sound of immense frustration and predatory fury. The very air vibrated, and the trees around me swayed violently. I didn't look back. I just ran, my feet pounding on the firmer ground, until the sounds of the swamp faded into the morning mist, until the putrid stench was replaced by the clean scent of pine. I had escaped. Again. But this time I had something more than just my sanity to prove it. I had the camera. And on its memory card, I hoped, was the undeniable, horrifying truth. The mire walker's furious roar faded, but its echoes would reverberate in my soul forever. I ran until my lungs screamed for air, until my vision blurred with exhaustion and the first weak rays of dawn. I stumbled onto the logging road, collapsing onto the gravel, my body racked with tremors, my mind replaying the terror of the past few minutes. The sound of the beast, its furious, frustrated bellow, still echoed in my ears, a testament to its reality and its proximity. I lay there for a long time, gasping, shaking, covered in mud, swamp water, and my own fear-induced sweat. I was alive. I had escaped. And this time I had proof. My hand instinctively went to the camera strapped to my chest. It was still there, muddy and scratched, but intact. Its weight, once a burden, was now a comfort, a heavy promise of vindication. I knew with absolute certainty that this would change everything. They couldn't dismiss me now. They couldn't. The walk back to civilization was a blur of aching muscles and an almost manic sense of purpose. I avoided the small town where I'd first sought help, instinctively knowing that I needed a larger stage for my revelation. I flagged down a passing truck, its driver initially wary of my disheveled, wild appearance, but my desperate, coherent pleas eventually convinced him to take me to the nearest city with a proper university and research facilities. The first place I went was not the police, nor a hospital. It was a university library, then a computer lab. My hands still trembled as I connected my camera to a computer, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and triumphant anticipation. The transfer felt agonizingly slow. Each byte of data was a piece of my sanity, a fragment of the truth. Finally, the folder appeared on the screen. Dozens of raw image files. I opened the first one. A blurry shot of the wrecked helicopter, then the distinct three-toed track, clearer than I remembered. Then the black, glowing ooze, its sickening luminescence captured with terrifying clarity. Each image fortified my resolve. Then I reached them, the sequence from the final confrontation. My breath hitched. The images were there. The phosphofungus lumina glowing on the creature's mottled gray-green skin. The chitinous plates reflecting the camera's flash. The terrifying fusion of reptilian and insectoid features on its head. And then the amber eyes, caught in the flash, wide with momentary surprise, then narrowing into chilling fury. The detail was incredible. Undeniable. Proof. I had done it. A hollow laugh escaped my throat, a sound of profound relief and utter despair. I had the monster, but the monster still had me. Its cold, intelligent gaze was burned into my mind, its wrath a promise of future retribution. I had won this round, but the game was far from over. I knew, with the chilling certainty of a survivor, that the world was about to learn a terrible truth and that I would be forever bound to the Meyer Walker, the last witness to its terrifying existence. My journey was not over, it had just truly begun. Part 17, The World Reacts. The world, as I had predicted, did not react with immediate acceptance. My images, circulated first to the university's biology and geology departments, then to a wider scientific community, were met with a storm of controversy. Initial reactions ranged from outright dismissal, elaborate hoax, digital manipulation, hallucination enhanced by software, to cautious intrigue. No one wanted to believe in a 20-foot, bioluminescent, swamp-dwelling monster that defied all known biological classifications. But the sheer detail of the photographs, especially under forensic analysis, slowly began to chip away at the skepticism. My camera's metadata was intact, showing no signs of alteration. The resolution was too high, the subtle textures of the creature's skin, the individual teeth, the pulsating glow of the phosphofungus lumina on its tendrils too intricate for even advanced digital fakery. Scientists examined the unique properties of the ooze samples I had managed to collect, tiny specks clinging to my camera and clothes. It was indeed the same bioluminescent fungus Eris had sought, but with a unique, previously unrecorded chemical composition intertwined with what appeared to be cellular structures unlike anything found in known organisms. The news broke. Swamp creature photographed, screamed headlines quickly followed by more sensationalized versions. Real-life monster found. The Meyer Walker, myth or menace? My face, haggard and still haunted, appeared on every news channel. I became an unwilling celebrity, paraded on talk shows, interviewed by skeptical journalists, and probed by equally skeptical scientific panels. I repeated my story endlessly, the details etched into my very soul, the vanished equipment, the terrifying sounds, the destroyed helicopter, the deaths of Eris, Sarah, and Mark, and finally, the direct confrontation. Each retelling was a fresh wound, a reliving of the horror. Public reaction was polarized. There were the believers, a growing number of individuals fascinated by the implications, demanding answers. There were the skeptics, clinging to every possible rational explanation, no matter how convoluted. And then there were the fearful, the ones who saw the monster as a direct threat, demanding immediate action. Governments and scientific institutions, now unable to ignore the mounting evidence, began to mobilize. Expeditions were planned, not just for research, but for containment or eradication. The swamplands, once ignored, became a new frontier of fear and scientific intrigue. But amidst the whirlwind of attention, a chilling realization settled over me. I had provided the proof. I had ignited the spark. But the true battle was yet to come. The Meyer Walker was not just a scientific anomaly. It was a force of nature, an ancient horror. And now the world was coming for it. And I knew with a terrible premonition that the swamp would not yield its secrets or its monster without a fight. My life, once defined by quiet observation, was now irrevocably bound to the fate of the beast and the looming conflict that would engulf the forgotten heart of the swamplands. The scientific and governmental response was swift, overwhelming, and, to my horror, largely detached from the visceral reality of the threat. They called it Operation Meyer Containment. Not Operation Monster Eradication, not Operation Save Humanity, but a sterile, clinical phrase that encapsulated their academic and bureaucratic approach. A joint task force was assembled: biologists, geologists, military specialists, environmental scientists, and even a few folklorists. I was an anomaly, an expert witness, a living testimony, but also a constant reminder of their initial disbelief. I was interrogated endlessly, my every detail scrutinized, cross-referenced with satellite imagery and the recovered and now studied initial cam footage. They wanted to know the creature's size, speed, behavioral patterns, weaknesses. I told them everything, recounted the horrific deaths of my friends, described the cold intelligence in its eyes. They listened, but their expressions remained guarded, their questions clinical. It was like I was describing a complex equation, not a living nightmare that had devoured my companions. The expedition itself was a monumental undertaking. A massive staging area was set up miles from the swamp's edge, a temporary city of tents, mobile labs, and armored vehicles. Drones filled the sky, their whirring a constant reminder of humanity's technological might against nature's raw power. Specialized swamp vehicles, amphibious drones, and heavily armed military personnel were deployed. Their mission: to locate the creature, study it, and if necessary, neutralize it. The word felt too small, too inadequate for the ancient horror lurking in the depths. Despite my status as the sole survivor and primary source of information, I was kept on the periphery. My pleas to accompany the initial recon teams were denied. "You're too valuable a resource to risk, mister." Thorne, a stern-faced military colonel, told me, his eyes devoid of emotion. "And frankly, your emotional involvement is a liability." I was confined to a makeshift command center, forced to watch satellite feeds and drone footage, pointing out landmarks, identifying areas of high phosphofungus concentration, and reliving my terror through grainy, impersonal screens. The recon teams entered the swamp with an arrogance that chilled me to the bone. They were equipped with night vision, thermal scanners, and heavy weaponry. They believed their technology would be enough. I knew better. The swamp was a living entity, its depths concealing a horror beyond their comprehension. I watched as the first teams disappeared into the dense, silent green, their radio communications crisp and confident. For a brief, terrifying moment, I imagined the mire walker, deep in its ancient lair, sensing their approach, a patient, primordial intelligence observing the clumsy, modern intruders. It was a predator, yes, but it was also the swamp's guardian, its ancient heart, and it was about to be profoundly disturbed. The initial reports from the recon teams were a mixture of scientific wonder and growing unease. "High concentrations of phosphofungus lumina, sir," crackled one comms report, "spreading much faster than anticipated. We're seeing it on virtually every surface." Another chimed in, "Thermal signatures indicate unusually high geothermal activity in the deep swamp, consistent with Elias's hypothesis of a unique energy source." They were talking about it with detached curiosity, like a new discovery. They hadn't seen the glow in its eyes. Then the reports started to change. Perimeter breach detected. Motion sensors triggered. Large mass moving rapidly towards Bravo team's position. Then frantic voices. "Contact! Contact! Massive creature! It's bigger than we thought." The professional tone gave way to shouts, expletives, and the frantic rattle of automatic gunfire. "It's taking heavy rounds. No effect. Oh my God, it's..." The transmission cut out abruptly, replaced by static and the faint, chilling sound of tearing metal. The command center erupted into chaos. Officers barked orders, screens flickered, tactical maps updated with grim precision. Bravo team's icon, once a solid green, turned red, then vanished. Another team, Delta, sent to investigate, reported similar engagement. "It's incredible. It moves like a shadow. We're losing men." Then a final, despairing cry before silence. "The smell? Oh God, the smell." I watched, numb with a terrible vindication, as the red icons spread across the tactical map, representing lost lives. They had underestimated it. They had dismissed my warnings. The mire walker was not just a creature, it was a force. Its roar, which had echoed through my nightmares, now seemed to ripple through the very air of the command center, captured by distant microphones, a guttural bellow of ancient fury. The ground outside, miles away, faintly trembled. The scientists who had scoffed at folklore now looked at me with dawning horror. Dr. Albright, a renowned xenobiologist who had initially dismissed my story as delusional, stared at the disappearing dots on the screen, his face ashen. It's adapting. faster than anything we've ever seen. He pointed to a new satellite image. The phosphofungus lumina was glowing brighter now, its sickly green light visible even from orbit, pulsating with an ominous rhythm. It was a beacon of the swamp's awakening, a signal of the monster's unholy power. The colonel, his face grim, slammed his fist on the table. Fall back. All units, fall back to the perimeter. Initiate Phase 2, incendiary protocol. They were going to burn it out. Burn the swamp. Burn the creature. But I knew with a cold certainty that burrowed into my bones that you couldn't burn out something that was born of the very earth, something that pulsed with the swamp's ancient, dark heart. This was not a battle they could win with conventional weapons. This was a war against something primordial, something that belonged to the silent, suffocating depths, and it was just beginning. The Mirewalker was not to be contained. It was to be unleashed. Incendiary protocol initiated. The command crackled over the comms, a desperate, final order. From the staging area, massive military flamethrower vehicles designed for clearing dense brush rumbled towards the swamp's edge. Behind them, airdrop canisters of napalm were prepped, their payloads designed to turn miles of the humid wilderness into a raging inferno. The strategy was brutal, indiscriminate. If they couldn't contain it, they would scorch it from existence. I watched, my stomach churning, as the first torrents of liquid fire erupted, painting the pre-dawn sky with hideous orange-red light. Trees exploded into fiery torches, the dense vegetation crackling and roaring as the flames consumed everything in their path. The heat, even from miles away, was intense, a palpable wave washing over the command center. Smoke, thick and acrid, billowed into the sky, blotting out the stars, transforming the horizon into a demonic landscape. It's working! Someone shouted, a desperate cheer. But even as the cheers erupted, a different sound began to rise above the roar of the flames. A low, vibrating hum, accompanied by a sickening squelch, amplified by the inferno. The phosphofungus lumina, instead of being consumed by the fire, seemed to glow even brighter, a defiant, malevolent green pulsating through the black smoke and orange flames. It was as if the fire was feeding it, making it stronger. Then, through the wall of fire, a colossal shape emerged. It was silhouetted against the inferno, a terrifying, grotesque mockery of a phoenix rising from the ashes. The Mirewalker. It was undeterred by the flames, its chitinous plates shimmering with an unholy green light, reflecting the fire as if it were a mere inconvenience. It moved with a horrifying, deliberate slowness, a creature of the earth rising against the hubris of man. Its immense limbs, glowing faintly, tore through the burning trees, scattering flaming debris like confetti. A collective gasp went through the command center. It's impervious, a scientist stammered, his face pale. The fungal composition, it must be insulating it, or absorbing the heat. The Mirewalker let out a guttural roar, a sound of profound rage and ancient power that ripped through the night, shaking the ground even at our distance. It was no longer the calculated hiss of a hunter, it was the enraged bellow of a king defending its kingdom. The earth trembled violently beneath our feet. The flames around it seemed to ripple and recoil as if intimidated by its fury. The military units, despite their advanced training, broke. I saw their formations shatter, men scattering like ants before a boot. The flamethrower vehicles, once instruments of destruction, now became pathetic toys, their occupants consumed by the creature or the inferno they had unleashed. The drone feeds, one by one, dissolved into static as the Mirewalker tore through them. I watched, sickened and terrified, as the glowing, monstrous entity moved through the inferno, a living embodiment of the swamp's ancient vengeance. We hadn't contained it. We hadn't eradicated it. We had only enraged it. And now, the Mirewalker was not just confined to the swamplands. It was free, and it was coming. The entire world, unprepared and oblivious, was about to learn the true meaning of primordial horror. And I, Elias, the lone survivor, the one they had called mad, was the only one who truly understood the depth of the nightmare that was now unleashed upon the earth. The swamp had won. The nightmare that had been confined to the swamplands burst forth into the waking world with a primal roar. News channels, which had been skeptical, then cautious, now broadcast images of unimaginable horror, the charred, splintered remains of military vehicles, the mangled bodies of soldiers, and, most terrifyingly, the creature itself. Captured by a few surviving, long-range thermal cameras before their feeds too succumbed, the Mirewalker was shown emerging from the burning swamp, its immense, glowing form a grotesque silhouette against the inferno. It moved with a horrifying, deliberate purpose, a living titan of mud, chitin, and ancient rage. The first human settlements in its path were rural logging towns and remote fishing villages. Reports trickled in, then flooded, houses torn apart, cars tossed like toys, and the same terrifying, cloying stench. Local emergency services were overwhelmed, their efforts futile against something that shrugged off bullets and fire. Panic spread like wildfire, far faster than the Meyer walker's lumbering advance. The initial scientific arguments over its classification, its biology, its origin were swallowed by the immediate, overwhelming need for survival. This was no longer a specimen, it was an extinction-level event. Governments, initially in denial, then paralyzed by disbelief, finally reacted. Martial law was declared in affected regions. Mass evacuations began, chaotic streams of humanity fleeing inland, away from the encroaching darkness. Military forces, still reeling from their catastrophic failure at the swamp, were redeployed, but this time with a grim, desperate resolve. Tanks rolled, fighter jets roared overhead, and every available resource was marshaled to face the unstoppable tide. I watched it all unfold from the command center, the screens now displaying real-time satellite tracking of the Meyer walker's slow but relentless march. Its phosphofungus lumina glow was visible from space, a pulsing green scar spreading across the landscape, marking its terrifying progress. Dr. Albright, the xenobiologist, now looked like a ghost, his earlier skepticism replaced by a profound academic terror. "It's not just moving, Elias," he stammered, pointing to the glowing expanse on the map. "It's growing, spreading its influence. The fungus, it's not just part of it, it's like a manifestation of its presence, a localized biodome of its energy. Everything within that glow, it's changing." His words struck a cold chord of recognition within me. I had seen the sickly trees, the darkened water. The Meyer walker wasn't just walking through the landscape, it was turning it into an extension of itself, a swamp made flesh. The true horror wasn't just its destructive power, but its insidious, existential threat. It wasn't just killing, it was converting. And I knew with a terrifying certainty that conventional warfare was only fueling its ancient, unholy power. The global reckoning had begun, but the scientific and military establishment, even in their terror, still clung to their paradigms. They saw a problem to be solved with kinetic force. I saw a living ecosystem, an ancient entity being provoked into an apocalyptic retaliation. My desperate attempts to interject, to share my unique, terrifying insights were still largely dismissed. I was the expert witness, the survivor, but not the strategist. Mr. Thorne, with all due respect, Colonel Evans, the new head of the task force, would cut me off, his voice tight with stress. "We appreciate your perspective, but we are dealing with a clear and present danger that requires a tactical response." My perspective, I seethed internally, was the only one that had actually witnessed its intelligence, its adaptability. I tried to explain the connection between the phosphofungus lumina and the creature, how the fungus seemed to feed it, or perhaps was even an extension of its very being. "It's not just a parasite, Colonel," I argued, pointing frantically at the glowing green areas on the map. "It's symbiotic. Or more, it's like a manifestation of its presence. When the fungus glows, it grows stronger, it moves faster." Dr. Albright, now visibly shaken by the unfolding catastrophe, was my only ally. He listened intently, his face etched with a desperate hunger for any shred of understanding. Elias's hypothesis on geobiossymbiosis warrants further investigation, he pleaded with the colonel. Its energy source might not be biological in the traditional sense. It's absorbing ambient energy, perhaps from the earth itself, and converting it through this fungal matrix. But his words were drowned out by the roar of fighter jets taking off, by reports of tanks moving into position. The military's approach was a tragic, predictable cycle: locate, engage with overwhelming firepower, suffer catastrophic losses, fall back. Artillery bombardments created craters the size of football fields, but the Meyer walker would simply emerge from the smoke and rubble, sometimes larger, always angrier, its luminous ooze pulsating with a more vibrant, terrifying green. Airstrikes using bunker-buster bombs briefly buried it, only for it to erupt from the earth, seemingly drawing strength from the destruction. It was a war against something that defied the laws of physics, a biological impossibility. "It's feeding on the energy," I screamed at them, pointing to the glowing satellite images. "The explosions, the heat, it's absorbing it. You're making it stronger." My voice was raw, my pleas desperate, but they fell on deaf ears. They knew only one way to fight, and that way was failing catastrophically. The Meyer walker was not just an apex predator, it was an evolutionary apex, a living weapon of mass destruction that turned human aggression into its own fuel. And with every failed attempt, humanity pushed itself closer to the brink of utter annihilation. I was a prophet of doom, screaming into a hurricane, and the world was deaf to my warnings. The conventional military response had not only failed but actively exacerbated the threat. The Meyerwalker, now a global phenomenon of terror, was no longer confined to remote swamplands. It moved with a horrifying, unhurried purpose, leaving a trail of environmental devastation and human despair. Cities in its path were evacuated, becoming ghost towns swallowed by an encroaching tide of fear and that sickening, sweet stench. Infrastructure crumpled under its immense weight, bridges twisted like pretzels, highways cracked, buildings imploded as its colossal mass pushed through them. Its behavior, too, seemed to evolve. It wasn't just blindly rampaging. Satellite imagery and drone footage, now almost solely relied upon due to the extreme danger of direct observation, showed it pausing, its amber eyes sweeping across the landscape. It seemed to choose its targets, often moving towards areas of high population density or critical infrastructure, as if with a malevolent intelligence. The phosphofungus lumina that coated its body, and now the ground it had traversed, pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to intensify with each act of destruction, its sickly green glow becoming brighter, its spread more rapid. Attempts at biological warfare were met with equally catastrophic results. Specially developed bioagents, designed to target its unique cellular structure, seemed to be absorbed by its fungal matrix, strengthening it rather than weakening it. One desperate attempt to freeze it with cryogenic chemicals only resulted in the Meyerwalker shedding its outer layer of ice and rock, emerging larger and more resilient, its bioluminescence flaring with renewed vigor. It was as if every human attempt to destroy it was simply providing it with new resources, new energy, new ways to adapt. "It's not just absorbing kinetic and thermal energy," Dr. Albright murmured beside me in the command center, his voice hollow. "It's incorporating elements. That new armored plating we saw after the cryogenic attack, Elias? It was infused with the very compounds we used against it. It's not just a creature, it's a living, evolving ecosystem, a biological superprocessor that converts threats into attributes. It's learning." His words confirmed my deepest fears. The Meyerwalker was not simply reacting, it was adapting, becoming an even more terrifying reflection of humanity's attempts to destroy it. Each failed weapon, each wasted resource, was a lesson for the monster, an upgrade. The world's finest minds, its most powerful weapons, were proving utterly useless against a primordial force that defied all scientific understanding and military might. Humanity was not fighting a war against a beast, it was fighting an extinction event, a battle it was rapidly losing. And as the green glow of the Meyerwalker's fungal spread crept across the continents, I knew our time was running out. Just as utter despair began to settle over the shattered remnants of global military command, a new voice emerged from the cacophony of fear and failure. It came not from a government lab or a military think tank, but from a small, independent research collective known as the Eldritch Ecology Group. Led by a reclusive but brilliant theoretical biologist named Dr. Isolde Kale, their theories, once dismissed as pseudoscience, now found a terrifying resonance with the unfolding apocalypse. Their work focused on pan-dimensional bioforms and non-carbon-based life, concepts that had always been relegated to science fiction. Dr. Kale's primary hypothesis, relayed through encrypted channels to a desperate Dr. Albright, posited that the Meyerwalker was not a singular organism in the traditional sense, but a localized manifestation of a much larger, interdimensional bioconsciousness. The phosphofungus lumina wasn't just its food or its skin. It was its nervous system, its means of perception, its way of interacting with our reality. The energy it absorbed from attacks wasn't just for sustenance. It was a way to ground itself more firmly, to expand its influence across our dimensional plane. "It's not trying to destroy us," Kale's gravelly voice explained in a recorded message that pulsed with chilling clarity. "It's trying to become us, to convert our reality into its own. The swamp is merely its anchor, its primary organ in this dimension." Her words sent a cold shiver down my spine, but also a glimmer of terrifying hope. "Elias, she's talking about the Meyerwalker's intelligence. Its cold, calculating gaze," I exclaimed, my own theories suddenly validated. "She sees what I saw. The swamp is it." Colonel Evans, chastened by repeated, catastrophic defeats, listened with a grim, desperate focus. "What's the solution then, Dr. Kale? If we can't kill it conventionally, how do we stop it?" "You don't fight it with force," Kale replied, her voice resonating with an unnerving calm. "You fight it with counterfrequency. You disrupt its anchor. You sever its connection to this reality. The fungus, Elias's phosphofungus lumina, is the key. It's its vulnerability. If we can manipulate its resonant frequency, we might be able to destabilize its connection to this dimension to force it back to where it came from, or perhaps even disperse it. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane, not to destroy the creature, but to unravel its very being. It required immense power, a precise understanding of the phosphofungus lumina's unique properties, and a willingness to gamble humanity's last hope on a theory that sounded more like ancient magic than cutting-edge science. But I, Elias, who had walked with the monster, who had seen its impossible reality, knew that this desperate, terrifying gamble was our only chance. The real battle wasn't with bombs and bullets, but with frequencies and fungal mysteries. And it would lead me back to the darkest, most ancient heart of the swamp, to the ultimate source of the Meyerwalker's power, its dimensional nexus. The Eldritch Ecology Group's radical theory, spearheaded by Dr. Isolde Kale and embraced by a desperate global coalition, launched humanity's last, most improbable counteroffensive. No longer was it Operation Meyer Containment, now it was Project Resonance, a desperate attempt to sever the Meyerwalker's hold on our dimension. Their research indicated that the phosphofungus lumina wasn't merely its biological manifestation, but a vast, interdimensional nervous system, a conduit for its consciousness and energy in our reality. To defeat the Meyerwalker, we had to attack its central node, the primary anchor that tethered it to our world. And that nexus, Kale theorized, lay deep within the most ancient, undisturbed heart of the original swamplands, the very place where our expedition had begun. I was no longer confined to the command center. My intimate knowledge of the swamp, my first-hand experience with the creature, and my instinctive understanding of its connection to the fungus made me an indispensable guide. I was paired with Dr. Kale herself, a woman whose calm, almost serene demeanor belied the terrifying scope of her scientific understanding. Her eyes, though sharp and intelligent, held a distant, almost melancholic wisdom, as if she had glimpsed realities that should remain hidden. Our journey back into the swamp was different. There were no armed convoys, no thrumming drones overhead. Instead, a small, highly specialized team, equipped with cutting-edge frequency generators and bioscanners, moved silently, almost reverently, through the now ravaged outer edges of the swamplands. The destruction left by the Meyerwalker's rampage was horrifying. Trees snapped like toothpicks, craters where towns once stood, the air still thick with the acrid smell of burnt earth and that cloying, sweet decay. But the deeper we went, the more the swamp healed around us, returning to its oppressive green, albeit with an unnatural, intensified glow from the spreading phosphofungus lumina. As we approached the coordinates of the original research camp, the glow became blinding. The very air shimmered with an emerald luminescence. The trees, the water, the ground, everything was coated in the pulsating fungus like an unholy, living carpet. And in the very center of it all, where our tents had once stood, was not a hole or a crater, but a colossal, obsidian-like mound, pulsing with an intense, sickly green light. It was enormous, easily 50 feet tall and hundreds of feet wide, a monstrous, crystalline growth pushing up from the earth. Tendrils of phosphofungus lumina snaked across its surface, thicker than pythons, glowing with an almost blinding intensity. The nexus, Kale whispered, her voice barely audible over the low, vibrating hum that emanated from the mound. Its core, its heart, the point where it grounds itself into our dimension. The mound wasn't just a part of the swamp, it was the swamp's mind, its brain, its central nervous system, from which the Meyerwalker's influence radiated. The Meyerwalker itself was nowhere to be seen, but I could feel its immense presence, a suffocating weight that pressed down on my very soul. It was here, watching, waiting, its consciousness spread throughout the entire, glowing, fungally infused landscape. This was not merely a monster's lair, it was the seat of a terrifying, ancient power. And we were about to attack its very soul. The air around the glowing obsidian nexus vibrated with a low, resonant hum, a sound that seemed to bypass my ears and reverberate directly in my bones. Dr. Kale, her face grim but resolute, directed the placement of the massive frequency generators. They were gleaming, intricate machines, humming with contained power, their purpose to emit a precise counterfrequency, a sonic weapon designed not for destruction, but for disruption. Their target, the unique resonance signature of the phosphofungus lumina, which Kale believed was the Meyerwalker's primary connection to our dimension. "This is it, Elias," Kale said, her voice strained over the hum. "If we're right, this will destabilize its anchor. It won't be pretty." Her team, a small group of specialists, worked with feverish intensity, their faces illuminated by the eerie green glow of the fungus. I helped where I could, setting up sensor arrays, my hands surprisingly steady despite the overwhelming dread. My fear was still present, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now tempered by a sense of grim purpose. This was for Eris, for Sarah, for Mark. For the world. As the generators powered up, a high-pitched whine joined the low hum, escalating rapidly into a piercing shriek that made my teeth ache. The phosphofungus lumina coating the Nexus reacted instantly. Its glow intensified to an unbearable brilliance, pulsing erratically like a dying star. Tendrils of the fungus, thicker than pythons, writhed and thrashed across the obsidian mound as if in agony. The ground beneath us began to tremble violently, not with the lumbering steps of the mire walker, but with a deep, systemic convulsion. Suddenly, from the depths of the swamp around us, guttural roars of pain erupted. The mire walker, spread across miles of territory, was feeling the assault. Its distant bellows were raw, agonizing sounds of a vast, ancient entity being torn from its moorings. On the bioscanners, the creature's massive form, which had been registering as a single, coherent entity across the global landscape, began to flicker, its edges blurring, its form becoming less defined. The Nexus mound itself began to crack. Hairline fractures, glowing with incandescent green energy, snaked across its obsidian surface, growing wider, deeper, with terrifying speed. The hum became a deafening roar, the air crackling with raw, unleashed energy. Kale shouted orders, her voice barely audible. Increase power. Maintain frequency. We have to sever it completely. Then a new horror emerged. From the shattered surface of the Nexus mound, grotesque, semi-formed limbs began to erupt. Not the solid, chitinous limbs of the mire walker, but amorphous, glistening tendrils of black ooze and pulsating fungal matter, reaching, flailing, lashing out blindly. They were crude, desperate attempts to manifest, to defend its core as if the creature was fighting to rebuild itself from its very essence. The air filled with the familiar, cloying stench, now amplified tenfold, a suffocating miasma of desperate, ancient life. We were not just attacking a monster, we were attacking its very being, its soul. And its agony was manifesting in a horrifying, visceral way. The mire walker's desperate manifestations from the Nexus mound were horrifying to behold. Amorphous limbs of black ooze and pulsating phosphofungus lumina flailed blindly, each whip of a tendril sending sprays of that sickening, glowing goo across the surrounding trees. They slammed into the ground, tearing deep furrows, creating miniature craters of bubbling, phosphorescent muck. The stench was overwhelming, a suffocating combination of putrefaction and ozone burning my nostrils and throat. It was the scent of a primal scream, a universe collapsing. The resonance shrieked higher, a frequency that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. Dr. Kale, despite the chaos, maintained an unwavering focus, her fingers dancing across the console, fine-tuning the generators, pushing them to their absolute limits. Her face was drenched in sweat, illuminated by the violent green flashes from the Nexus. "It's fighting back," she yelled over the cacophony. "It's trying to manifest, to re-establish its physical form through the core." The entire swamp around the Nexus seemed to warp and shimmer. The trees distorted, their forms stretching and blurring as if viewed through heat haze. The water in the channels rippled not from wind, but from unseen pressures, forming strange, unnatural eddies. It was as if the mire walker's agony was causing our reality to bend, to fray at the edges. I saw momentary glimpses of other landscapes in the shimmering air, alien skies, impossible geometries, colors that defied description, fleeting visions of the dimension from which the creature had originated, bleeding through into our own. Then, from the massive obsidian mound, a new, more horrifying development. Not just tendrils, but immense, partial features of the mire walker began to push through the cracks, a section of chitinous plating, grotesque and shimmering, a cluster of needle-sharp teeth grinding against the rock. A single amber eye, unblinking and filled with ancient, unadulterated hatred, snapping open. It was trying to reconstitute its full form directly from the Nexus, a last, desperate act of defiance. The air grew cold, heavy, and the ground convulsed violently, threatening to throw us off our feet. "It's consolidating," Kale screamed, her voice strained. "It's focusing its energy to manifest completely. We have to sever it now." The generators roared, pushed to their breaking point. Their casings glowed cherry red, sparking and sputtering. The high-pitched shriek reached an unbearable crescendo, a pure, concentrated assault on the mire walker's dimensional tether. The fissures in the obsidian mound exploded outwards, sending shards of glowing rock flying. The ground beneath us tore open, revealing depths of pure, pulsating green light, like looking into the heart of a cosmic tumor. The mire walker's manifesting features writhed and contorted, its partial eye rolling wildly in its socket, its teeth gnashing at the empty air. It was a spectacle of raw, agonizing power, a battle for the very existence of our reality. And then, with a final, ear-splitting shriek that resonated through my very soul, the world went white. The blinding white light lingered for what felt like an eternity, washing out all color, all form, all sound. Then, as abruptly as it began, it vanished. The world snapped back into focus, but it was a world transformed. The piercing shriek had ceased, replaced by an absolute, profound silence that was more unnerving than any scream. The low, resonant hum that had emanated from the nexus was gone. The overwhelming stench of decay and ozone had dissipated, leaving behind only the damp, earthy scent of the swamp, now strangely clean, almost sterile. The colossal obsidian mound was still there, but it was no longer pulsating with light. Its surface was scarred, riddled with deep fissures and dull, lifeless. The vibrant, sickening green glow of the phosphofungus lumina had vanished. What little remained of the fungus was a lifeless, gray powder, crumbling to dust at the slightest touch. The amorphous limbs and grotesque features of the mire walker that had attempted to manifest from the core were gone, leaving only scorch marks and faint indentations on the cracked stone. Dr. Kale stood beside me, her team gathered around the now silent generators, their faces pale, their eyes wide with awe and exhaustion. She looked at me, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "We did it, Elias. We severed its connection. The anchor is broken." Her voice was soft, reverent. I looked out at the swamp. The immediate area around the nexus, once a virulent green, was now eerily quiet, almost normal. The trees, though still scarred from the mire walker's earlier rampage, were no longer glowing. The water, though still murky, seemed less menacing. The overwhelming presence, the suffocation, the cold intelligence, it was gone. The mire walker's coherent form, visible on the global satellite feeds moments before the surge, had vanished. It was no longer manifesting in our dimension. But the victory felt hollow. The cost had been immense. My friends, countless lives, entire communities. The swamp itself, scarred and burned, a testament to the brutal conflict. And I, Elias, was forever changed. The memory of its amber eyes, its ancient rage, its terrifying intelligence, it was burned into my mind, an indelible scar. The phantom stench, the lingering chill, the echoes of its roar, they would be with me always. We had won the battle, but the war against the unknown was never truly over. Dr. Kale theorized that the mire walker's consciousness still existed somewhere in another dimension, perhaps dormant, perhaps waiting. We had merely pushed it back, sealed the gateway, at least for now. The swamp would heal, life would slowly return, but the scar of what had happened, the knowledge of what lurked just beyond our perception, would remain. Humanity had faced its first true extra-dimensional horror, and it had narrowly, desperately survived. I was a survivor, yes, but also a sentinel, forever listening for the first faint hum, the first cloying scent, the first sign that the mire walker was reaching back. The world was safe for now, but the silence, I knew, was a fragile thing. The aftermath of Project Resonance was a strange confluence of global relief, scientific triumph, and profound, unsettling silence. The mire walker was gone. Its monstrous form no longer terrorized cities. Its spreading fungal influence receded. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief, then began the arduous process of rebuilding, physically and psychologically. The devastated swamplands became a protected, quarantine zone, a place of grim pilgrimage and intensive long-term study. Dr. Isolde Kale and her Eldritch Ecology group were hailed as saviors, their once fringe theories now mainstream. The official narrative was that a unique geothermal biological entity had been repelled. The term extra-dimensional was used sparingly, cautiously, deemed too unsettling for the public. I, Elias, found myself in an unexpected and uncomfortable position. I was no longer the madman, but the reluctant prophet. My early warnings, my blurry photographs, my raw testimony, all were now confirmed. I was an invaluable resource, constantly consulted, interviewed, and asked to analyze data. I worked closely with Dr. Kale and Dr. Albright, helping them map the residual energy signatures in the swamp to understand the lingering effects of the mire walker's presence. But the role was a heavy burden. Every map, every data point, every scientific discussion was a fresh reminder of Eris, Sarah, and Mark of their last moments. I saw their faces in the patterns of the phosphofungus on the screen, heard their screams in the static of old comms logs. The knowledge I carried, the truth of what the Meyer Walker truly was, weighed on me like a physical burden. I had seen its cold intelligence, its malevolent curiosity, its rage. I knew it wasn't just a beast, it was something profoundly alien, something that understood that thought. The world celebrated, but I mourned. They rejoiced in its disappearance, but I felt a chilling certainty that it was merely dormant, retreating to its own horrifying dimension, gathering strength, learning. Kale's theories, which I now embraced fully, suggested a complex, almost sentient network, a vast consciousness that simply existed across planes. We hadn't killed it, we had merely unplugged it from our reality. The silence that now settled over the swamplands, and indeed, over much of the world, was a fragile thing. It was no longer the silence of the swamp's natural rhythm, but a tense, watchful quiet like the calm before another storm. I found myself listening, constantly, for the faintest echo of that low hum, for the subtle shifting of energy, for the first whisper of that cloying, sweet stench on the wind. I walked through life with a constant, pervasive unease, knowing that the greatest horror was not what we had fought, but what we still didn't understand, what lay just beyond the veil of our perception, waiting for its next opportunity to resurface. The scars on the land would heal, but the scars on my soul, and on humanity's collective consciousness, would remain, a permanent reminder of the thing in the mire. My journey as a witness was far from over. Months turned into years. The global recovery was slow but steady. The ravaged areas began to regrow, slowly shedding the physical scars of the Meyer Walker's passage. The quarantine zone around the swamplands remained, monitored by an international body that combined scientific research with a new, ever-vigilant defense protocol. The phosphofungus lumina never returned to its previous virulent state within the zone, but small, isolated pockets of it still shimmered in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the swamp, a constant, eerie reminder. I became an unofficial guardian, a living archive of the Meyer Walker. My expertise was unparalleled, born of direct, horrifying experience. I advised new generations of scientists, lectured at secure facilities, and consulted on deep swamp reconnaissance missions, though I never re-entered the core zone myself. My nightmares persisted, vivid and terrifying, but they were now interwoven with a grim acceptance. This was my life now. The sentinel of the threshold, the one who remembered. Dr. Kale and I continued our research, moving beyond mere observation to theoretical defense. We explored concepts of dimensional resonance, energy manipulation, and even the possibility of creating a permanent frequency barrier around the most vulnerable areas of the planet. Our work was highly classified, driven by the chilling understanding that the Meyer Walker was not a unique incident, but potentially one of many such entities lurking in the vast, unknown recesses of interdimensional space. The universe we now knew was far more terrifying than we had ever imagined. My old cynicism was replaced by a somber resolve. I no longer sought vindication, the world now believed. Instead, I sought prevention. I dedicated my life to ensuring that humanity would be ready should the Meyer Walker, or something even worse, ever attempt to breach our reality again. I learned to distinguish the subtle shifts in atmospheric pressure, the faint, almost imperceptible changes in electromagnetic fields, the barely audible hums that could indicate a dimensional disturbance. I carried the memory of Eris, Sarah, and Mark not as a source of paralyzing grief, but as a driving force. Their sacrifice had opened my eyes, and now I had to keep the world's eyes open too. The world slept, mostly unaware of the constant, silent vigil maintained by a select few. They rebuilt their cities, forgot the terror, returned to their everyday lives. But I remained watchful, listening to the silence, forever scanning the horizon. For the Meyer Walker, I knew, was a patient horror, and its true nature, its ultimate purpose, remained a terrifying enigma. The swamp was a scar on the earth, a monument to a battle barely won. And I, Elias, would be its eternal guardian, listening for the next whisper from the mire. The nightmare for me was a never-ending vigil.